Hello, and welcome to another episode of Build Further, a podcast about making remote work by Clap. My name is Max Gayler, and I'm a content strategist and async advocate. In today's episode, we get to speak to Jackie Newnam, a senior product manager at Process Street, an oracle of organizational knowledge with years of experience in adapting businesses to the remote world. Her career in product is proof who you hire completely changes how your product works. She talks about swagger and style and empowering brands to choose tools that make them stand out, not blend in. Having worked for exciting, young, and hungry businesses like FormStack and Typeform, she now works at Process Street building a no-code solution to help those same fresh companies stand up on their own 2 feet fast and push big players to keep making big steps. She warns me of the consequences of process fatigue in remote companies, why product managers feel like parents, and why it's their job to crush dreams of what is realistic. I hope you enjoy what she has to say. All these buzzwords. To start, I would just love to hear about you. This is something I don't know. Is like if you could take me through your career in product and how you kind of ended up in the position you are now.
Yeah. So now I'm at a senior product management level, which is crazy. I started in sales and lead generation, and then quickly realized that my colleagues were getting more leads than I was, which then brought me into marketing operations. And then I quickly moved into product operations overall. And so then that eventually led to the decision of whether I wanted to go into product marketing or product management. And I found that I really enjoyed working with developers, putting a plan together, working with design, less a copy person, more of design oriented. So quickly started into product management through being a product analyst to begin with, which I think is really important in this day and age with data. Big data, the big buzzword. But then it moved into product management, was specialized in enterprise product management for a long time at a forms company called FormStack, and then moved over to Typeform to become a product manager specialized in distribution. So how do people get access to forms in the channels that they're in? And then I moved to Process Street to be, a product manager here, focusing on many different things based on the stage of this startup. And so I think having different experience in different size product orgs and where they are in the life stages of a product has been really, really interesting and eye-opening, especially at this new startup that's a lot smaller than I'd been at before.
Okay, interesting. So how many people are at the Process Street at the moment?
I think we have 80.
Okay.
75, 80. Yeah. And we've got about, I just looked this morning, just over 5K customers, but then we've got 700,000 users of different aspects.
Okay.
So you got creators and you also have users, and we always have to keep these individuals in mind when we're building products.
That's so exciting. So it's kind of like when you joined Typeform, Typeform was kind of at that kicking off stage, where I think it was maybe about 200 employees when you joined, and then it was more 400 when you left. Not maybe not quite that much.
Yeah, it was around that, and it felt like more of a stabilized product. We knew what we wanted to do and the things that we needed to do moving forward. And now it's more of, here are the things that our customers really need. And then we're up against innovation. So it's an interesting space to be in at Process Street. And it's similar to Forms, where it is data collection, but it is more focused on automating process, making it fun, fast, and faultless, for everyone.
Yes, I mean that when I was looking into Process Street before this conversation, I was quite interesting. I was like, oh, cool. Someone's I think one of the main conversations I've had with people are kind of about remote work, especially is and I think a lot of what kills company culture is processes and the sea of processes that are made that are also necessary because you don't have the same tools you have working together physically. So processes kind of need to be in place. So it's how do you try and make processes cool? And I guess that's kind of what Processor Street is doing.
Yeah, it's like it started off as like a checklist, and then they quickly moved into more conditional logic, more automations, and then now we're getting into more like customization of your brand. So you can have like cover images across the experience to kind of give, like if it's a PTO request form, like having like a beach to like, set the tone of what you're about to be filling out. We've got this cool new feature that's I'm actually testing today where you can change the colors of the in-app experience to be your single brand color. So trying to add as much splash of fun as we can, because processes can get boring. I would say that our specialty is employee onboarding and client onboarding. Is really where our bread and butter is. And onboarding through Process Street was really helpful to see your task list and then all of the different things that you needed to learn on another panel. And so it really helped organize me as I was, one, learning the product and onboarding, but just like kind of get to grips with how quickly I can get up to speed in the first 3 months.
Okay, that's great. I was going to say, because I mean, onboarding, yeah, is especially. I was going to ask you what your kind of main use case is with Process Street, but yeah, I guess yeah, onboarding makes sense because that I've only onboarded onto one company remotely, and like yeah, it's a hard process because there are some things that that you're going to some obvious things, but then there's some things that like you don't want to leave someone stranded, because if someone's stranded in the office, you have that your buddy, you can kind of keep an eye on them. But like if someone's feeling a bit stranded and they're just in front of their desk at home, it can be a bit worrying. So I guess that's a sensitive subject.
Yeah, and I think one of the key features that we released, I think it was like over a year ago, was being able to add comments. So like if you're stuck on a specific task or something like that, you can just like tag somebody in a comment to like help you out. And then obviously you've got like Slack and email and whatnot, but something within the tool itself to be able to help raise your hand on a specific task that doesn't make sense, or
I think that's really. I think yeah, that resonates quite well with me, just because I feel like something that I've really valued when things have gone well in onboarding is when like you're immediately thrust into like collaboration, because you can often feel like you're not ready to raise your hand, right? You're like, oh, I probably need a few months under my belt before I can raise my hand. So it's quite nice that like that you're kind of empowering people to do that already.
Yeah, I think also, well, with forms in general, I think taking those paper processes and then making them online is a jump forward into the remote space. And I feel like once everything happened with COVID, forms got more interesting because people needed a way to communicate and work together without being in the office. And then Process Street, I feel like, has taken it to another step level. And FormStack does have like a workflow product. So there's been, I feel like it's rumbling in the form space to have like workflows and like databases. And so I think it's data collection is an interesting space, man.
Yeah, I bet. And I would love to hear a little bit more about. Do you feel like you still use that sales experience that you got at the start? Do you feel like that's still kind of feeding into your job role?
I feel like it has to. You gotta be compelling to get things move forward. You gotta have real, not swag, but you have to have that confidence in trying to get others to see your side without being too pushy. So I think that's definitely come in quite a bit, especially when at Typeform and having love Kim, but he would always be like, "Well, why are we doing this?" And it's just like, okay, it's up against the CEO. Let's let's go.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So how because you was it FormStack you were at before Typeform, and it was there you kind of built.
Yeah.
You got you got various promotions that kind of took you up to the level you are now, like as a senior product manager, right? And so I would love to know like what kind of main lessons you kind of learned there, and what kind of maybe things you realize don't work, and some things you realize do work, and you've then taken on to your new jobs at Typeform and Process Street.
Yeah, at FormStack in particular, it was not having a roadmap more than 6 months.
Okay.
I think at FormStack, I was really trying to follow. I didn't necessarily have individuals that had done the role before. There was a lot of things going on. The head of product had left. I was kind of stranded, and the first project I had was HIPAA compliance and releasing
Okay.
that. And so that was a biggie, and it was a lot of fun. It was a huge document I had to read, but I kind of like doubled down on thinking about how we could create a roadmap that we could use for a year, and that wasn't realistic. Things change, customers have feedback, you need to pivot, you need to be agile, and it's just not worth the effort to put a year product roadmap together. So that was a big lesson there. I think another big lesson is product, you're like a parent. So like you just need to make sure that everybody's getting along. You need to work really closely with design and making sure that you're not, because I like to say that product likes to squash dreams of what is realistic. And so, working closely with design to make sure that you understand where they're coming from, they're designing the vision and helping them understand what is the happy medium of what is capable versus what is the vision. It's always good to show the vision to the developers, but then also making sure developers and designers are getting along, because that's definitely a point of conflict that I've seen in other organizations that I've been at. And so making sure that everybody is getting along and creating an environment where everybody can have a collaborative approach, facilitating collaborative conversations and brainstorming. And so I always like to think that, I think I had a manager at Typeform told me this, like, you and the engineering manager are like parents in in this grand scheme of things. And so I think that was a big lesson learned there, where it was just like we just need to all get along so we can move faster. And being remote, it's so hard to like get to know people. And so at FormStack, I had to forcefully create some of those environments so that we can all get to know each other, so that we can move fast and faultless without, conflict. And at Typeform, it was the same, because at Typeform, I think when I joined, it was the first remote team of devs. Everyone had been in the office. Our office wasn't necessarily conducive to remote work at the time. Like I remember joining Zoom meetings and they couldn't figure out Zoom inside one of the conference rooms, and it was like very challenging. And so having developers come on board who have been used to a specific way of working, which is the traditional way of product or design throwing a project over this gate and developers just going in and building it. And so wanted to create more of a collaborative approach, more of a Typeform environment, as you would say, because we did have a really good culture. And so facilitating a lot of those brainstorming activities really helped from my learnings at FormStack.
Okay, great. I was going to say, because you joined Typeform while there still was an office at the end of was it the end of 2019?
Yep.
And then
Yep. Barception, lunch in the office. It's great.
yeah, this thing's just it can't exist anymore, sadly. So yeah, you and I were in the same situation where I was at Typeform and I was in the office as well. And then so we both experienced kind of the big change to remote. And it's very interesting to look at kind of like companies that are like start remote first and companies that become remote first, and like how much harder it is for a company to change than just start out and choose it from the beginning, from the early stages anyway.
It's definitely difficult, because at FormStack there was an office and it was like, I think 30-70. 30% was in the office and then people were remote. And there was like perks that were happening in the office that everyone remote felt left out of. So that was like really difficult. While at Typeform, everyone had to go remote. I think Typeform had a good way of facilitating remote work with like type coins and benefits for everyone across different countries. So I think there was benefits there. Process Street is remote first, which is my first like experience going into a remote company, onboarding remotely, not meeting your friends or your colleagues until like an
Yeah.
office party or like a meetup. So it has been an interesting experience, and it does take a lot for organizations to change if they have not started remote first.
And is that process now of, like you say, you can almost have to adapt this teacher role, this parent role. How do you find like that happening, and managing to maintain that feeling remotely?
Yeah, I think it's through like happy hours and like Friday dates where you're just like, chatting, talking about your weekend, talking about hobbies, playing games. But then also, and it's something that I had to start at Typeform, which was having brainstorming meetings using tools like Mural or Miro or now FigJam, and being able to start harnessing some of those brainstorming sessions online only.
Mm,
I've tried to do that at Process Street as well, especially with bigger projects that are coming up. We are working on a forms product, so
exciting.
that also needed a lot of brainstorming and discussion between developers and designers and ahead of taking it on as a project. And so, yeah, facilitating a lot of those conversations and just like scheduling them. I think that's the hardest part is everyone's so busy, and finding time on somebody's calendar for like an hour or an hour and a half is challenging.
Yeah, I think everyone feels like the meeting fatigue, and the even just like, to be honest with you, just even the Slack fatigue. Like, I mean, I think people love Slack, but it you can get Slack fatigue quite easily because you're just kind of lost in channels, and you're
Yeah.
lost in notifications, not really knowing what notifications mean, and like worrying that you're not going to have the right amount of context. So that was going to be my next question, was asking like what kind of tools you guys use at Process Street to kind of keep your communication working and keep the product moving.
We use Slack, but there is fatigue. There's definitely a lot of fatigue. There are channels that I pay attention to, channels that I ignore. I kind of have folders now with Slack, like an alarm bell next to the ones that I
Yeah.
know that needs my attention. I would prefer to have a balance between Slack and email. I think that's the space where it's like if something that needs to be excuse me, communicated, this is, set in stone, something around communications about the company. I feel like email is a good space for that. Working with a team, I think, is better in Slack, but there's just a lot of discussion. And then I find that a lot of people would rather just communicate in Slack. And then it's like, I'm spending more time reading and thinking before responding when we could have just had a 5-minute discussion and that would have just solved it. So I think there's a balance of understanding of like, okay, we want everything to be in Slack, but we also need to figure out what is more time consuming. Is it more time consuming for me to read your big ass paragraph and try and understand and internalize it and before I respond? Because, Slack is the word. It's like you want to make sure that you're being clear when you're communicating, especially via text. So I think it's always going to be challenging in this remote environment. I think at FormStack, the way that we really handled it was daily stand-ups, which is also fatigue of
Yeah.
itself. But it was a space to talk about problems that came up and to have like a dedicated time to actually talk through them versus relying on Slack to communicate through text.
Yeah.
We also use Loom quite a bit, which is like video recordings of the visual problem and then communication on top of that, which I think it's really helped me. It's not something that we did at Typeform as much, but at Process Street, we're using Loom quite a bit. And I think that's really helps communicate on top of like a paragraph of text.
Yeah. So I mean, that uh, partnering visual communication with text communication, I feel like is probably what's going to be helping a lot of teams, especially product and engineering teams in the future, because you need to be visual. It's like you said, it's so hard to explain things perfectly in a paragraph, and if you do, you end up, it's a big long paragraph, people see it and they're like, I'm not reading that now, I'm not going to get into that. So
Exactly.
yeah, you see in your experience, you're finding that a tool that can actually visually show things better is is maybe saving you time?
I think so. I think Loom is great. I think if there's a space where you can have a video and have comments, which Loom has, but it would be great to have like more of descriptive spaces. So if I'm asking a question, I can verbally show it, but then I can also type it out specifically what I'm seeing as both, and then having individuals comment. I think that would be helpful. I think the last follow up loop is for that comment to go into the main channel of communication, which is Slack for us.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, you want to. I feel like what slows down a lot of products and engineering teams is just the decision making part of it. Is the feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the hardest things about asynchronous communication and what in the world of distributed work is you're kind of working on everybody's clock, and not everybody's available at the same time, and definitely no one is. I think everyone feels a bit like unsure of who makes the final decision. That's why it's very important to kind of have those spaces, like you say, where you can just make strong, hard decisions.
Yeah, I think that's been the way that we work at Shape Up. The founders are really heavily involved, and so I think the decision making line is it's thin. At Typeform, it was product managers, and I think that's helpful to have somebody that's going to do the final decision. I feel like right now what I'm experiencing at Process Street is I'll make a decision and then someone will come in and be like, well, let's do this instead, and it's like, okay, that's great, let's just do that instead. And so it's a little, I think every org is going to be different.
Exactly that. Yeah. And this is one thing that's kind of been recurring across all the conversations we've had for the podcast is there's no quick fix. There's no one size fits all. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
what comes down to kind of being in a successful product team that actually pushes growth is just adapting, right? It's just adapting and adapting and adapting.
Yeah, making a decision, iterating on it. Like, I think the biggest thing that I've always tried to take is just not be scared to fail. Fail fast. If you can fail fast as you can. Make a decision so that no one's bottlenecked. And if that was the wrong decision, well, we'll fix it. It's not a big deal.
Exactly that. And on the subject of kind of working with engineering teams, how are you doing that at Process Street? Is that using like for example, how are you kind of visualizing updates to the product and like the changes you want to be made?
A lot of the time, every update that they are creating, they'll create a Loom video for us to watch, and then at some point we have feature flags in Launch Darkly. So if it's at a point where it's pushed into that feature flag, we can test it on our own. We also have a testing environment that you can test on as well. I usually like to wait until it's on the feature flag because I know that there's nothing additionally being added at that moment, and so it's kind of like more of a final end product. Um, so yeah, a lot of looms and then testing on my own, and then I'll usually send a loom back if there's any issues that I'm starting to see myself.
Cool, that's great. And how are you finding going back to kind of your original idea was like never make more than a 6-month roadmap? How is it going? Kind of sticking to that ethos you had.
Well, at Process Street, we don't have a roadmap. So we work in Shape Up, which is really about taking what customers have been saying, what we've been learning about the industry and the market within the last 2 weeks, and making a decision on what we want to build. And so it's very fast paced. The developers have about 6 weeks to deliver something that is going to be put into customers' hands. So it's very it's like sprinting to the end, and so you're basically running this, yeah, I would say marathon, but it's really not. It's like a sprint, to get these list of features that would help a customer with a specific pain point. If some things don't get done, that's just the line that they build in. So I'll put a list together of the things that we want to do. We've got design for that list. Halfway through the sprint, we'll sprint. Halfway through the cycle, we'll figure out if all of these are accomplishable. they're in priority orders in chunks that would be valuable to customers, so that if the development team doesn't get to a specific scope, it's not end all be all. We have the chunk that is going to be valuable to customers. So we don't have a roadmap. It is a little aggressive for the product team because it's like we got to pivot a lot. It's a lot of writing out new documentation and identifying new features or things that are pain points for customers, and then putting what we call a pitch together, basically a sales pitch of why that feature should be taken into consideration. Then that goes into a betting table with the director of product as well with the founders to identify what will be moving forward.
Okay.
And that's just kind of how we
So
work.
you're kind of pitching it to each other constantly. That's kind of that I feel like that would create a lot of ownership within the product. Is you feel like you really own a part of the product.
It's at this stage of the org, because we're so young and there's a lot of things that we've released that customers have additional features requests associated with. It's a lot of everything. So I feel like I've not necessarily had ownership. It's more of ownership of pain points of customers and working on various different features associated with that.
Okay, cool. And are you kind of prioritizing, like, I'm assuming you're still kind of organizing this quarter by quarter, right?
Yes.
So like, do you go into a quarter with like trying to tackle a certain like customer profile, or are you kind of trying to like, attack lots of different places at the same time?
Right now, we were focusing on employee onboarding in more of the enterprise space, which is where brand customization came in. Moving forward, I think we're going to want to focus on specific metrics and then have that as the theme of the cycle. So I think right now, the next cycle will probably be more focused on the drop-off rate between sign up and then actual creation of a workflow, and focusing on not necessarily experiments, but features associated with moving that needle.
Cool. Okay, that's really interesting. And you like you were saying we you are about 80 people at the moment at Process Street, and have you noticed you've got 5,000 users and about 700,000 or 5,000 customers, about 700,000 users. Do you find that you're leaning on your customers more and more as time goes on in terms of like getting that feedback, or do you feel like you're able to make the decisions a bit more independently now?
Now after a year and having a ton of customer calls, I feel like I can help speak for them, but I think we're still leaning on customers and how they're using us, because I think in the past, the company is really focused on employee onboarding and recognizing that there are other different use cases that people are using Process Street for, and making sure that we tap into those and understand their needs as well, I think will be key for us to move forward and being successful.
Okay, great. That's really interesting. And on that note, I would love to kind of like finish off the conversation just by talking about kind of the future of products, and like if there's anything you see like in the product world, like any trends or any methodologies that you think are either like, hey, this isn't going to be around in 5 years, or like, hey, this thing we're doing now is going to be the biggest thing in 5 years. Like, what do you think is really going to stick or not stick?
Well, when talking to like some of my colleagues around product, I feel like shape up's becoming more and more of a methodology that I believe Basecamp was one that came up with it. And so I feel like a lot more orgs are adopting shape up in younger product spaces to help move quickly. I think there's always going to be that challenge of how long things take, how quickly the estimate changes as soon as you get into the code. So I think it's really going to depend on the org, how young their code is or how refreshed it is. I think more and more companies are going to be focusing on tech debt and making sure that their tech debt is handled or mitigated, or there's a plan moving forward to constantly take that into consideration. Because in my experience, just having a ton of tech debt as at FormStack and like at Typeform, it's very hindering to move forward and to move fast. And so I think having that mindset of taking on tech debt and potentially moving into shape up. I think agile will always be around. I think having plans depending on, how where the product is in the stage of growth. Like Process Street is quite young, and so there's still a lot of things that customers want us to improve on features that we've already released. While at Typeform, it was more of a mature product where it was being innovative and finding new things to do. And I think innovation, Agile kind of works more, or Scrum works more with innovation when you're trying to focus on a new big thing that takes longer cycles to work on versus moving quickly on different items based on your customers' feedback. So I think it's really going to be depending on the size of the company, the code base, and where the product is in the growth process of whether it's a young product or a mature product.
It's so interesting, isn't it? How ShapeUp kind of, I've never worked in ShapeUp. I think I've only ever worked in Agile, but it's quite interesting. It sounds almost like a more agile version of Agile. Like it sounds like it's much more ready for spontaneity.
Yes, it's a lot of pivoting and it's a lot of moving forward. I think it depends. We take on Shape Up and we've made our own type of Shape Up methodology. And I think each organization is going to take a bit of agile or whatever and make it their own. But I think if you're trying to move quickly and you're trying to try new things to see if they work, or if you have a lot of customer feedback on particular items, Shape Up really gives you that space to just be like, okay, what can we get? It's like almost like Hive Sprint, like at Typeform, where it was like, what can we get done in 2 weeks?
Yeah. Like let's kind of put ourselves in the box and put the constraints on, just to see if it inspires anything.
And I feel like it does, because at that point, I mean, even with like tasks, if you put 5 minutes down to clean your dishes, they're basically cleaned after 5 minutes. Like if you just do, it's like a mental space to be in.
It's true. It's very true. I mean, I think that's one of the things that kind of drives product teams so much is, hey, we've got this crazy deadline and it's totally unrealistic and we're probably not going to make it, but we're just going to do our best to make it. And I think that's kind of what drives the, like, hey, how can we cut corners here without sacrificing like quality of, the user experience? Or how can we like make this process faster without having to like, hire another person? So I think it sounds like something I think a lot of people should try out, especially like you say in those early stages.
Yeah. And I think the best way to have success is just having those milestones. Like, is milestone 1 something that's going to be helpful for customers? And I think you can have, I've seen in the past milestones that don't really mean anything. And I think it's really important to make sure that they are not deliverable chunks, but something that's better than baseline. And having those milestones will really help move fast. And yeah, like get something out in the 2 weeks time or whatever time frame you have.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you so much, Jackie. Time's kind of like
I hope
flown
this
by.
was helpful.
Yeah, no, this is also so useful. Thank you so much. If people want to like hear more about you, kind of follow you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Probably LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm not so much a Twitter gal. I don't know why, but
fair enough.
Reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a message. Happy to chat. I think product's super interesting, and as we're moving in the generation and the space that we're moving in now, I think product is going to be more and more important in the future.